Greetings. My name is Ty Brown, and I have a mantra. My mantra with regard to leadership is this. The role of the leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of.
Right, so I think everyone associated with this team has done that at some point or another. Hunter, you are an outstanding teammate, and you make this team an environment people want to be on, which is why you're on scholarship.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown with AthleticDirectorU. I am here on campus at Ohio University, joined by Julie Cromer. Julie is the Director of Athletics here for the Bobcats. Greetings, Julie. Thanks for having me here on campus.
Well, welcome to Athens. We're glad you can make it to campus, your first visit.
It
correct?
is my first visit. First time in Ohio, actually.
Oh,
Think about
wow.
it. Well, no, it's not. In college, I was down here. We went to some big gathering at Ohio State, but I've been here once before, a long time ago. 20-some years.
Welcome to Athens. There's no place like it, so I'm glad you
happy
included it in your stop.
It is green and beautiful. Now, you've been in this position for almost 2 years, almost 30 years in college athletics, stops at Wright State, NCAA, Indiana, University of Arkansas, various positions of leadership, and now you find yourself in the chair. You are on committees. You are part of the NCAA Division I Board of Directors. You are involved in a number of things throughout the industry, which, from what I understand, you have to be knowledgeable to be on those committees. You wouldn't have been appointed or selected if people didn't respect what you know and what you bring to the table. One other thing I've heard you say was that you should always know what you are going to contribute to a meeting before going into that meeting. So I wonder about your process of staying knowledgeable throughout the years, and then also preparation for meetings or for all these various organizations and committees and things that you're on, your preparation and education process, I guess is what you would call it.
Well, you've given me a lot of credit. I'm not sure that I deserve all of it, but thank you for the kind words. I think what you're talking about is something I've said before about being in the room, and I think a lot of us, particularly as we're coming up through our careers, think if we can just get into a particular room, whether it's senior staff or executive staff or what have you, that, we want to get in there because we think that there's magic that happens in that room. But I've always advised, and I've learned myself over the years, that it's better for you to think about what you will contribute once you're in the room. Just getting in the room isn't the deal. It isn't the magic, if you will. And so I do try to do that. And I think in answer to your question directly, I try to maintain a fairly broad network. I try to talk to people who are beyond my immediate reach through perhaps my conference or my own campus. I try to go beyond my circle of friends and really expand the voices that I may have to ask for advice, to ask for insight into a particular issue, and just figure out what it is I don't know about a subject, and then take on the responsibility of factoring that into whatever I may be thinking about a particular topic. And it does take a little bit of work to be prepared ahead of time for meetings. And, I may not be 100% prepared as much as I should be every time, but I think it reflects intentionality, and it really goes back to making sure that I have something to contribute that is not so much what my agenda is, but is useful to the broader focus of whatever that group is handling.
I imagine with 30 years of experience in various different roles, there is a working knowledge of essentially the topics that are going to be discussed, right? I mean, you definitely want to prepare, but there's probably always a working knowledge of what's going to be discussed, I imagine. One question I do have about these board of directors meetings, especially when you talk about the Division I board of directors, things are so much in flux right now. You'll have to indulge this question, but are there times when you guys are talking and the meetings go into some theoretical prediction of what could possibly, almost like a Marvel universe in timelines? If this happens, then this happens. And how does that happen? Or are you guys real strict on agendas? Tell me about the insides of those types of meetings.
Well, I wrapped up my Division One board term a little over a year ago,
Okay.
just in time, truthfully, as the pandemic was coming and so many of these other issues that we've been dealing with over the last 6 months. But I would say this about the board, with the exception of the pandemic, which caught everybody by surprise. The Division One Board of Directors has been talking about a number of the issues that we're all experiencing and facing this summer for years. It's not as if people have been completely caught off guard by the topics themselves and the complexities themselves. And so I think that group does a really nice job of trying to be thoughtful, of trying to represent a variety of viewpoints and positions within Division One. It's a very diverse division in and of itself. And you're right. There are times when I don't know if it raises to the level of Marvel Universe, but theoretical applications and second and third level thinking about what happens if this alternative or that option is the one of choice. And they're presidents in that room primarily. They are very well-read, very smart people. They're used to dealing with a lot of complex issues. They know how to synthesize a lot of information. There are some meetings that are limited to the items on the agenda, and then there are some meetings where broader discussion takes place.
So in my research, I heard you on a number of, I read information about you, heard you on Patty's podcast on women leaders. I heard you on Travis's podcast on Inside Higher Ed Athletics. And one of the things you said is you make evidence-based decisions, right? And I was trying to discern, does that mean like data analytics, or does that mean like do your research before you actually make a decision? Talk to me a little bit about what that means in terms of leadership, I guess.
Well, it's kind of you to do your research before asking the question. I do believe in evidence-based decision-making, and it probably reflects a little bit of my academic background. My graduate degree was in analysis, like policy analysis. And so a lot of the framework that I use comes from that study. But it really is a little bit of both. In some cases, you do have the data in order to analyze and recognize trends, and they could drive you toward a decision. But in a lot of what we do, with a world that is changing so fast, you don't always have a robust data set to go to run modelings like nerds like I like to run models. And so, I don't know that you can always rely on that. And I also think sometimes you just have to make a decision quickly. So you use the tools that are available to you at the time. One reason why I like to talk about being evidence-based in decision-making is I think sometimes we can be emotional in decision-making. Sometimes we can, especially in a very demanding field like ours, we can be run down. We can find ourselves in an energy deficit. And I think being evidence-based is one way to be sure that we stay disciplined and in a lot of ways counteract against some of those tendencies that are easy to follow into in this field.
Yeah. Is there, when I heard you talk about that, I wondered in my brain, this may be another theoretical question, but I wondered, like, what if the evidence you've gathered as you work towards making a decision, what if that evidence is based on a flawed premise, right? And now you're making a decision that may not be the right decision because the evidence was probably flawed. Did they teach you that when you were analyzing policy analysis? So tell me about that aspect of it.
That is a critical question. And you do have to look for bias. You do have to look for flaws in how the data is collected. Even something as simple as student-athlete exit or experiential interviews or surveys, which a lot of us do. Some people use outside vendors to do it. Some people do it in-house. How you ask the questions, how you frame the questions, who asks the questions, how you order the instrument, when you conduct the research. All of those things are factors that can create some flaws and, as you say, and in some ways compromise the value of the evidence that you're using. And so I think that's exactly the right and smart question. You have to have a diverse group of people involved in the process in order to counterbalance that. And so diverse in perspective, diverse in experience, diverse in, frankly, maybe agenda of what they're trying to what they're trying to get out of whatever the process is. All of those perspectives help you to keep that in check. But I think the biggest step is to be aware that it's there and understand that you can make data say anything you want if you know how to do it. And so, you have to look for that, particularly if you're going to rely on only one or two methods of evidence to get to your decision.
I wonder if there is an aspect of that when hiring, right? Structured interviews, free-flowing interviews where your gut is telling you something. Like, how do you approach that with the analytical brain that you have to hiring staff, hiring coaches, and those types of things?
Sure. Well, particularly in the case of coaches, you have a lot of data available to you. And so if you take the time to do that, if you're a person who likes to know those numbers, the reality is you can, in many ways, limit your opportunities as to who you land on in that search if you only rely on the numbers of their career to that point. And so sometimes it depends. Who else was on the coaching staff? Where were they when they earned that record? What sort of advantages did that team or institution have relative to their conference peers or whoever their competition was? What was going on in that year where you see a down record? What was going on in that year where you see a really great record? And, you really have to dig in a little bit more than we often feel like we have time for in a coaching search. But I like the combination. I also like the fact that, particularly for people who have been around a little bit, it's a little bit harder with individuals who are earlier in their careers. But if they've been around a little bit, people are who they are, their patterns are what they are. Sure, they can have a big event, a life-changing event, a period of growth where they learn a lesson. Maybe it's a tough one. They apply that lesson and they move forward. But there's a pattern of consistency. And so whether you can see it in data and records or you can see it or hear it, rather, in the stories you hear and what you hear from the people who've actually worked with them in a variety of capacities, those patterns emerge, whether they're verbal and over the phone or these days by Zoom or
by
Teams,
Zoom, exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Or in the data themselves. And I do use both. Not everybody does, but I do like to look at some data, particularly in our coaching analysis. Yeah.
Staff. What about staff? There's not a lot of data on.
But it depends on what you're hiring for. If you're in the development or revenue generation space, then same kind of thing. You can see some numbers, but wow, big numbers don't always reveal the impact that individual had in reaching those, and reaching those numbers. And so you really have to continue to dig into the circumstances and situations that drove those numbers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you don't know if they're going to fit, right? They may be a problem. They may affect the team chemistry, staff development, those kind of things. So.
That's right. They may be an absolute producer.
Yeah.
And to my way of thinking, if they are, they are, and that's great. And I don't need to compromise or undermine that. But they might also not fit, this particular setting or this particular role even. And but that doesn't mean they're not a producer. And so I think you've got to give people their high marks. You've got to give people their results, respect them for that, and then find a way, particularly if they're not a fit for you, find a way to carve that out in the messaging to them.
I wonder, 2 years in, we talk about evidence-based decisions or using different methods to make decisions, right? Whatever they may be. Even just intuition. Have you had to make, well, you probably make a ton of decisions every day, right? You talk about decision fatigue, deciding what to wear affects the decision you got to make 3 hours from now. But if you will, is there a difficult decision you've had to make and your method for making that decision? I mean, is it based on some of the things we just said, or off the back you had its intuition, like this is not going to be good for us to do, or just in the 2 years you've been here, have you had to make, I know you've had to make difficult decisions, but is there one you would want to share or discuss, even just the theory behind it or something?
Well, we've had to eliminate some positions over the course of the last year, and those are hard. And knowing that you do so, the factors that go into that, but knowing that doing so in some ways also protects other positions. That is to say, if you are in a situation where your revenue is not going to come in, as we all were over the last year with the pandemic, and so it was compromised, or you have budget cuts that many institutions are facing in addition to the pandemic challenges. You end up weighing, if I make this decision, if I go into the Marvel universe and I make this decision,
Right.
Which part of the world or which part of the universe will be lost versus which part of the universe will be saved. And some of that is analytics, but most of it is process, and most of it is also trying to determine in that particular situation, how long do we have to give up those positions and where do they work, and do we have the bandwidth as a staff to live without them for that period of time. And those are things that are very difficult to see in a data-driven model or evidence-based. Exactly. You've got to have a little bit of feel of that, and frankly, a little bit of faith in some cases. But I would say, since I've been here, issues related to cutting positions and then furloughing staff were hard decisions that kept me up at night.
And you, did you have Did you have all the conversations?
Yes.
Oh man, yeah, that's tough.
Yes, we did. I am very happy to say, though, while we had several positions we had to cut, the majority of them were positions that were vacated. So in other words, we saw some of this coming, and we strategically held on to some positions and did not backfill them, so that even if they were in areas where we really struggled to lose the staff support, we weren't asking someone to leave who was in an existing position. We only had to do that with a couple of individuals. And then in the case of the furloughs we took last fall, we ended up outperforming our projections at the end of the year. And so I worked with campus to make sure that we could give some of that money back to our staff who ended up taking the furloughs. So right. At the end of the day, it has cycled around and put us in good position going forward. But even that doesn't, make me look back and have any less angst over those decisions. They're very difficult.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've heard you say in the past was, you get into a role where you're leading people, leading an organization, you want to bring your strength as a leader. Mm-hmm. What is that for you? The strength you bring, you brought to being in the positions you were in before here at Ohio, and now you're in this leadership position here. What is the strength you have brought, I guess, to the positions you've been in?
But you'd have to ask others and keep me honest on this. I'd like to think that some authenticity and some transparency and communication, we have worked on that particularly here over the last year, as we've had to make difficult decisions so that people understood, even if they didn't agree with, maybe they understood our thinking to get to some of those decisions. I am analytical and strategic, and I think those things help at certain times. I also have to fight the opposite, which is, not to let myself overthink or become, too analytical. And I work hard at that. But I do try to be thoughtful and intentional. I try to be transparent, and I'm a pretty direct communicator, particularly when I need to be.
I imagine the not overthinking is probably something that you've probably dealt with for a long time.
Yes, that's a life thing. Yes, not just a career thing. Yeah. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
for sure,
exactly.
For sure.
So I wonder this. I haven't asked a question like this before in one of these videos, but I think I feel like they fit sometimes. In our personal lives, sometimes we face things that actually give us a pivot or inflection point in our professional lives, or in our philosophy on leadership, or in our philosophy on dealing with people. Is there something in your life, anything in particular, that you feel like, I talk to people, I am transparent now with people because of this? Or, just in life, what were some challenges or a challenge that helped you get to where you are now? I guess we learn from everything.
I think a couple of years ago, I was in an interim athletic director role at Arkansas, and the experience, it was a very brief period of time, but it was fairly volatile. And I think the experiences during that time have given me a different perspective on our industry in general, on what it means to be somebody who is visible and a visible leader, and, the stamina you need to bring to that, and the honesty you need to bring to that. And I think there also are elements of that in these visible jobs that are about being a representative of the organization. And particularly if you're in a situation in which it may be better for the organization if the message point is A, but you are in a situation as that leader where you can see that, there are competing interests and alternating truths behind that message. What is it? What is our role as visible leaders for our institutions to toe the line, or to try to impact that and try to bring more transparency to the process, or whatever it may be. And, in that time, I think it was very volatile. It was it was over a period of time where there was an athletic director change, but also a football coaching change. And there were a lot of people who were calling the shots in that particular situation. And there were a lot of people who had very strong opinions about that. And, for me, as I reflect on that, I think it just gave me a much deeper and broader understanding of all the forces that are at play in our industry. And, a lot of times we come into this industry because we appreciate that a lot of our work is about raising leaders, is about pouring into our student athletes and supporting our coaches and staff as we do that. And also, depending on what our backgrounds are, or, where we're from or where we've worked, it's also about building community. We have an opportunity to bring people together around sports, and we do that. We build communities and we build leaders. But the stage has become so amplified now in ways that there is entertainment in the form of what happens around the action, not just the action of the games and the things that we think about, but, who's going to be in this or that role. And, even speculation about job openings and who the candidates are. And, a lot of that is not even factually based, but it is part of the thing now. And so I think for me, that was about 3.5 years ago now. And so it really reset my, I think, focus on my career path and, what kind of setting or place would be well suited for me, and what my next opportunity would be that I would fit best with.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Open your eyes and realize, this is much more than my friends told me about. It's much
right,
more than
much more. I've been living in that environment for years before I've been there. Yeah. So, but it was a different role, and it was a completely different peak. And again, it was at the most volatile of times.
Right, exactly.
So, we haven't flowed with that. But I will say that that entire experience for me and frankly for my family
was a challenge.
Was a mark. Yes.
Yeah, man, that's interesting. I'll ask 2 questions and then we'll wrap. The first question, which we are very interested in at AthleticDirectorU, is about the future of college athletics. Your thoughts on the future. There are a number of people retiring. There are a number of people coming into the chair as AD. There are court cases. There are, changing legislation from different states. There are a number of things. Student athletes are empowered, I guess. So I wonder about your thoughts on the industry and leadership in the industry of college athletics.
Well, it does seem like a volatile time, and it is. It is a volatile time. There's a lot that's changing, but we have been through cycles of change in college athletics since the dawn of college athletics, for hundreds of years, literally. There are inflection points along the way that involve student athlete deaths and safety issues, and we used to have pay for play, not saying it was a healthy thing, but, we had people who weren't even students who were just paid to go around and, play in various football games and perhaps in other settings. So, this is not new. It feels new to those of us who have come around in the, last few decades, but it is just our turn. And I think the other thing that's important to remember is what is constant. And what is constant is the fantastic opportunity we have to develop young people within the context of higher education. There is nothing else like it. There's no, in my opinion, in my very biased opinion, admittedly, there is no other leadership intervention that is better than sports, particularly for women, particularly for underrepresented groups across the board.
Right.
And if you look at the statistics of where individuals who participated in sports at any level, and then certainly in college sports, where their lives have taken them and the opportunities that they've been able to find through sports and through the leadership lessons they learned in sports. There's nothing like it. And so those things all remain. Those values all remain. And we have the opportunity to hold on to them despite all of the challenges that we're facing this summer. And so, it's our turn to step up and do it. You're right about the retirements. It actually reflects what we see in higher education and in society. We have, in our political roles, presidents and others who are serving in roles who are at later and later stages of their careers. We have a wave that is turning over, at least in American society, and across a number of sectors. So we're not unusual in that regard. There's a whole generational cohort that is retiring, and we are going to have to figure out what to do.
We're just
when
visible.
They're gone. Yes, that's right. That's
College
exactly
athletics,
right.
visible,
Yeah, we're
right.
just visible. And the reality is, I have deep belief in the younger folks who are coming into the industry, and sure, they may see it differently or may not, or they may want to emphasize different things than, even my generational cohort does. But I think there's nothing but upside there. And I think it will be the energy that gives us the opportunity to respond to all these challenges.
Yeah, which is excellent. I'll ask this final question here and then we'll wrap. Our live experiences, our career experiences, we hope that we are evolving every year, every decade, with every position. You're 2 years in to the chair. I wonder what has evolved within you over the last 2 years.
Well, I am still working on becoming a better executive. I'm still working on understanding what athletics can bring to the entire university. I knew that coming in. I had ideas about that, particularly mentioned my work at the NCAA. There was some policy work there that overlapped with academic issues and faculty, and I worked with presidents. And so I had a backdrop for that. But I will admit, in my earlier stops, I was in a very athletics focused role. I might have been a liaison to some of these divisions across campus, but I was really focused on the athletic department, and those athletic departments were self-sustaining. And we obviously rely heavily on institutional support here. So I would say two things: my capacity as an executive, my executive bandwidth, if you will, and my discipline within that to do AD things and not want to wander into, the deputy AD things that I used to do. We've got really great people who fulfill those roles. It's that, and also just a deeper and better understanding of how athletics can fit within the campus environment and what we can bring to the university, which is really critical to the role here. It is a topic of much debate on this campus, is part of the fabric and personality of this campus. And so diving into those issues and articulating that value proposition has been a big area of growth for me in the last couple of years.
Do you just dive into those things, learning how to be a better executive and think on the executive level, and then also on campus, athletics on campus? Experience is what it's going to get you. I mean, is there an outside knowledge vein that's helping you with these things, or you dive in and you self-analyze to know that you're getting better at what you're doing?
I think you do have to take some responsibility in it, but I certainly have had great advice from, very wise people in the industry, including, advice that I need to think about. I think we all do. What are the things that only an athletic director can do? What are the things that are specific to this role? You have to do those things, and you have to do those well. If you find yourself dabbling in the things that others on staff can do, it's time for a reset. Yeah. These jobs are demanding, and they are so encompassing, and there just are not enough hours, days, weeks, months, to do everything that you could want to do. So that was very simple and direct, but I found that to be just a golden piece of advice. And then as it relates to our university and our value to the university, I've talked to people who have been on campuses in the athletic director role where similar tensions and conflicts existed, and just tried to learn from their experiences. And in one case was somebody who I think figured out how to navigate it and had a nice long run at that university. In another case, it was somebody who was willing to be very generous and share with me the mistakes he had made that he could see now, he couldn't see then.
Yeah,
and
right.
and I heed that warning.
Right, which is excellent. Well, Julie, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us here at Athletic Director U and having me here on campus at Ohio University.
It's great to have you come back anytime.
Yes, ma'am. That was Julie Cromer. She is the Director of Athletics here at Ohio University. And of course, I am Ty Brown with Athletic Director U. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.